So I came to see that at that time when I created the Momentum Mind, I thought that it was all up here. I thought that this was the thing that you needed to work on, all of these cognitive skills. I was looking for things like sharpness and performance and focus. But actually, when I was hearing from people, and my nature was not to emphasize that so much. It was much more to emphasize the development of the human being and who they are. And I felt as if the Momentum Mind was too narrow. It needed to be much more expansive in the human being. So we interviewed a lot of people who had gone through our programs, and they started using words like grounded, anchored, stable, secure, peaceful. They realized, okay, there's something that's happening in this grounding quality that's happening with people, because what was happening is we were talking about life. We were talking about how to bring some consistency into our lives and how to choose the direction of our lives. And for a lot of these people in an environment that moves so quickly, there's no space for self-reflection. And it feels like you're just moving with the direction of where the business is going, but you have no say in the matter. And what they felt from being in the Momentum Mind was that it gave them pause. It gave them an opportunity to actually take stock and choose how they were going to live. So it actually came through a meditation that a friend had guided me through, which was focused on the HARA, which is this point. I did this meditation in a woods in Ireland, in Clarenbridge, and I was walking out and I was thinking, God, that was so incredible. I really feel so good and so grounded. And then I was thinking, I wish more people could get access to something like this. And then I was like, wow, that's it. That's what we're getting at. That's the direction that this is going in, and it should be called HARA.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you've gone beaten in battle.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, a better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders. All right. So to start, can you state your full name and 3 or 4 sentences about who you are and what you do?
My name is Patrick McAndrew. I'm the CEO of HARA. So that means that within that we have a community for individuals, for entrepreneurs and business leaders who want to elevate their lived experience. And we also do corporate trainings. I also offer public speaking on these topics and themes. And I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Awesome. And so basically it sounds like, from the research that we've done and from talking to you a little bit before, you're giving like top 1% advice to the top 1% of people, and creating like a community for those people. But before you were involved in like putting communities together for entrepreneurs and business owners, business people, you were not at all doing that. You've had a winding road, and I'm excited to get into all of the details of it. But to start, were you a bad reader?
Oh yeah, like I
because I see hella books behind you right now. So
I remember there was one Christmas where my mum, she was running the Irish outpost of a nursing agency. So they would hire nurses, and she was doing that in Ireland. And she got to go to New York one Christmas, or just before Christmas, and she got us gifts. Now at that time, I was a lover and a true believer of Santa. And we would have stockings and we would have our gifts. And when we would come down, Santa had gifts in the stockings and he had gifts under the tree. And I went and I looked through my stocking, and there was, I think could have been like an Xbox game, and there was 2 books, and then there was something else. And when my mum wasn't looking, I went and I took those 2 books and hid them under the couch, so that when she said, "What did you get?" I was like, "Oh, I got these chocolates and I got an Xbox game." And she was like, "Is that it?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's it." Because I hated reading. I hated it entirely. And she would try and encourage me to do it, and I would do anything I could to avoid it. And yeah, that pretty much continued out through most of my teenage years.
What did you like instead of reading? Like, what were you really interested in?
I was playing a lot of sports, and I was always with a group of people. I was always outside. I was never a person to linger in my room. In fact, it's kind of ironic of how things have changed, but constantly my mum was trying to say to me, you need to learn how to spend time on your own, Patrick. You can't always be with other people. And I needed that. And then, later on in life, in my mid-20s, things really took like a 180 turn. But that was my character as a kid. I think in the report cards, it was like, has a lot of potential, needs to learn to sit still, needs to learn to be in his seat and during class, because I could just get up and go and talk to another kid in the middle of a class. So
you like needed to learn some self-discipline and how to spend time alone. But it sounds like you had some interesting people come through the house that could be like role models too, for maybe like what your mom wanted to you to model yourself after, or wanted you to be inspired by. How did the most traveled man stay at your house?
So this guy, Mike Spencer Brown, there was always an eclectic array of people coming through our house.
Why was that?
Because different things. So my stepfather is Czech. So there was a lot of people from the Czech Republic and Slovakia coming through.
And this is when you were living in Ireland. Yeah.
This is when I was living in Ireland and in the UK. I moved from. Was born in London, lived there until I was about 7, and then moved to Ireland. So there was always sort of cousins coming through, friends of family who their daughters or their sons wanted to learn English. They would come and stay with us. And then my mum had an employment agency, so there was nurses coming from the Philippines, Brazil, Eastern Europe, babysitters. They would come and stay with us for a week or so before they would go to where they were going to be working. So it was a chance to always be engaging with all these different cultures around the table. And on one occasion, I think my mum was in the car and she was listening to the radio and heard an interview with this guy, Mike Spencer Brown, who had been traveling the world for about 24 years. And Ireland
24 years?
Yeah. Ireland was his last country for his world tour.
In the world?
Mm-hmm.
He had been to every country.
And not just like being in it, but had traveled extensively. Like he would travel all around the country. So he was explaining to me that there was a lot of people who would do this, but they would just kind of get the passport stamp and dip their toe. But he could spend months in each country. And he said, I'm going to be in Ireland for the next month and a half, and I'm going to be in these parts of the country. One was Galway, which is where I was growing up at the time. My mum texted in. She didn't tell us, I don't think, but I came home from school one day and there was her and Mike were at the kitchen table having a conversation. And
what did he look like?
He was wearing my clothes. That was the other strange thing, because he only had like two outfits. And I had a t-shirt. I can find this and send it to you if you want for the episode, but I had a t-shirt which was for St. Patrick's Day, and it said iPaddy, and it was both an Apple logo and a shamrock mixed together in a green t-shirt. And that was the t-shirt he had, and that's what he was kind of wearing around all the time that he was in Ireland, that any of the photos that I saw that he was in. So yeah, he stayed with us for like 4 days, and it was very interesting because my opening line to question him about things was, have you ever been to? And always it was met with a yes, so any country, it was like Iraq, Somalia, Mogadishu, yes. Afghanistan, yes. All these countries, he had been there. North Korea, yes. And eventually I would just have to name a country and say, tell me about this country, Mike, because ultimately he had been there.
Did that make you want to travel? Like, did that give you interest in what could the world look like outside the UK and Ireland? Like, and what does that look like exploring it alone potentially?
We traveled a lot anyway as kids. We traveled a lot. With my mum and with my stepfather, whether it was in different parts of Europe or in Africa, that was sort of mainly the places that we would have gone to. And then we had all these cultures coming to us. I think what it offered me more than anything was this recognition of all of these different life paths. None of these people existed within a social bracket. They were their own entity. And my mum was very much that way. So I never was ascribing to this path, this kind of a collective path, but rather recognizing that I could find my own way. And that was what was being, I think, mirrored to me in many of the people that came through. Of course, there were nurses and that was a certain path that they were taking. But then there was also these very eclectic people that were constantly coming through our home.
Yeah, and it sounds like this was an inspiration to you, where it's like, okay, maybe like I can make my life into anything that I would like. Yet you took initially a very safe and a tried and true path of going into corporate law, which I would say is probably like one of the most like safe and conventional paths that you could take. What initially attracted you to corporate law or doing law?
Well, I wanted to be. There was two things. I wanted to be a host on TV. Michael Parkinson in the UK. I think Michael Parkinson had a show on ITV, and then Jonathan Ross. They inspired me. I loved watching them on Friday nights. So I had this sort of dream of wanting to be that, and then I was ascribing to the path of what do I do if I go to college, and I looked it up and it said I'd have to study journalism, and I didn't want to study journalism. So then I questioned whether I'd go to college at all, and I thought, I'd really enjoy just selling, because I did that with my mum. We went with the businesses she had. We went to a lot of trade fairs. I enjoyed being in the booths, chatting with people, observing them, selling things. And it was my godfather who had a conversation with me, and he said, so what's the plan? As I was coming to the end of my high school, or secondary school as we call it in Ireland. And I said, I'm thinking about becoming a salesman. I'm going to try and get a sales job. And he said to me, nobody will respect you if you go straight into being a salesman. He said, you need something. He said, he said, you'd make a great lawyer. You should study law. And I was like, okay, sure. So that's...
It's crazy how like when you're young, you're so multiple. Like one person can completely shift how you view the rest of your life.
100%. And yeah, I remember going into, the career guidance counselor, and you answer all these questions, and then I suppose it was like an old form of AI almost, or it was certainly like a matching system, and then you get all these career potentials or possibilities. But that even leaves you more confused, because it's not forcing you to ask questions inside. It's just presenting you a series of options. So I didn't know. So I just was like, okay, I'll just go for this law thing. And
did you like it?
No, it was a waste of 4 years. Absolutely. The only good thing I think that came from it was spending time in France. I spent my third year in France. That opened me up. That led me to what I pursued later.
What? How did it open you up?
Well, I got a job in a gastropub, and it was my friend and I. So it was a small little pub that served food, really good food. And it was a couple. They lived upstairs, Marie and Roger. I've gone back there to try and reconnect with them in Toulouse. And I was told that it's called the Killarney Bar. I'd love to know them and be in touch with them, but I couldn't find a way to get in touch. It's since turned into like a jazz bar. Yeah. Couldn't get contact with them. But it was the two of them and then my friend Aidan, and the four of us ran the place together. And yeah, I became much more interested in that. I kind of stopped going to college, to be honest. Really? I think I was meant to get like 60 credits and I came out with 12 from that year. I just realized this is much more interesting. I would spend time with Marie in the kitchen. She was showing me how to cook.
What was interesting about it?
Because there was so much that I was experiencing, that I was engaged with. When I would go to lectures in college, because it's mainly off the Code Civil, the civil code, and it's this huge book with all of the legislature and the foundational principles of how the legal system works in France. And a professor would come in, oftentimes from the courts, in their gown and their wig, and they would sit there, open up a section of the book, and they would just start reading it and giving commentary. And everybody was sitting there on their laptops. It was just the patter of buttons being pressed on laptops. And it was so unengaging to me.
Yeah.
Whereas working in the bar, I was learning about wine. I was learning about food. I was engaging in service. We would sit down, all of us, and have a meal together, and we would have a great conversation. There was all these characters coming through. It just was way more enjoyable to me. And through that, they would bring us on trips. And they brought us on one trip to San Sebastian where we went to this cider house, which completely changed my just feeling towards cuisine. I have this feeling that food, when it's done with a real traditional sense and with great care, not for scale, not for just turning tables, but when it's done as a real way of caring for the patrons, it's this communicator. You feel it, you understand what these people are about or what this culture is about in an implicit way. They don't have to come and describe it to you. You just feel it. It's happening around you. It's the way the food is prepared, how it shows up in the dish, the way the service is.
Yeah, it's like
the environment.
self-evident.
Yes, and it gets into you, and I loved it. I thought this is just incredible. So, yeah, that became much more interesting to me than the path of law.
Wow. So, I mean, what do you think, as you became more interested in the food service industry, what do you think that your godfather would have said about that? Or like, what was there any commentary from your family that had told you to go into corporate law and you're like, you know what, this law thing, not really interested, but food, like way more? Was there any pushback from family about that?
Not really. I think once I got a degree, that felt like that was... For my mum, that felt like that was the
box checked.
That was the box checked because she had to leave school when she was 14, and for her to have her son go to college felt like it was sort of a representation that she had done her job and she had taken me to a place that she wasn't able to get to. So to accomplish that felt like it was the accomplishment, but I also think she had immense confidence in me and that whatever I wanted to do, good would come of it. So wow. I felt like there was a lot of support there. She never lived a conventional life, so likewise, she didn't totally expect it of me either.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that's like really good to have that support from your parents, because then you could actually, and especially your mom and your family, because like you could actually pursue the things that were interesting to you. And I feel like that's usually the things that have the most return. And so what did you do to actually pursue that interest in food? Like what would you do next?
So I read an article that said that Brooklyn was now the epicenter of the food world, that's where food culture was emerging from, that up to this point, Paris ultimately for decades and decades had been sort of shaping what restaurants look like around the world, because it was the brasserie, and from there was deviations of that. And now it was shifting gears. It was both a sort of blending of Brooklyn and Copenhagen. They were influencing things. The Nordic food movement was taking this more minimalist approach, and then Brooklyn was introducing more of a casual fine dining, and there was a lot of I suppose artisanal produce was not unique to Brooklyn at that time, but there was something happening there. Like years later, I was in Colombia and I was in a bar and I was going upstairs to the toilets and there was parts of the wall missing. Like I could see into the other building, and I went to the guy who looked like he owned the place. Turns out he did. And I said, "What happened? Did you run out of money during the construction project?" And he said, "Oh no, we're going for the Brooklyn look." So this was like a mentality, you know, that if it's like exposed brick and pipes, this is a very kind of Brooklyn vibe. So
a literal hole in the wall place.
Yeah. So I thought, well, I'll go there. I'll go to Brooklyn and I'll see what's going on. I arrived in New York and I was just asking people all the time, I want to work in food. That's all I could say, because my only experience up to that point was working in this small gastropub in France. And people would say to me, "Yeah, what do you want? Do you want to be a chef?" I don't know what I want. Do you want to be a manager? I don't know. I just want to work in food. So I didn't have enough clarity in my own sense of what I wanted. So I ended up working as a laborer in construction for the first 4 months. And then I worked in a property in Battery Park City, cleaning floors, washing out the streets outside, and always still trying to find a way to get in somehow into this industry. And through some chance connections and encounters, I was in a process to get a job with Dig In, because they were a company I really wanted to work for.
What was Dig In?
Dig In was like this first kind of fast, casual, healthy, organic food that had come to New York City. So it was, Yeah, it was just a place where you would go and you could get like really clean and healthy food, but you could get it done like that. It was just like there was people behind a counter, almost like a Chipotle style, but it was done for healthy food. And this was the first expression of this that had been seen in New York, because this would have been in 2015. They just had a few locations there. Adam Eskin was the CEO at the time. I managed to meet him at a conference. He had lined me up with some interviews internally. And then at that time, and that was sort of the dream job then, but at that time I got connected to a hospitality group called Avrico, and they had just let go of their general manager of a restaurant in Soho. They were looking to hire one. Now I was 22. I had no experience at all, certainly not in the US. And I got hired as the general manager of this restaurant, and I was like the third youngest person out of a staff of 27. And that was a total trial by fire. Like the first Friday, I took the role of expediting the plates, and it was a disaster. I totally messed up. The head chef had to step in after 20 minutes because I was just getting things wrong. And I said, "I'm so sorry, Charles, but let me do it again next week, and maybe I'll go for 30 minutes, and then the week after I'll go for 40 minutes, but I'll get better at this." Having to let people go for some terrible behavior was my first experience hiring and firing, dealing with customer complaints, your inventory, your food, managing the P&L. It was a great teaching.
And so as you developed in this industry, like were like, and you were getting better and you were learning how to like fire people and hire people, did you think it was like increasingly for you? Was there any part of it that you were like dissatisfied with, or was it mostly just like a positive experience?
It's a multi-layered question. I certainly threw myself into it. I immersed myself in it. The company that I was working for, they would give me a monthly budget to go and eat out. So suddenly I would get to go and eat out in restaurants in New York City and not have to pay for it, and just send a report back to the group of what I experienced in this restaurant. I was reading a lot of books on hospitality. Chef's Table had just come out, so there was a lot of excitement around that. I had been captivated by the power of bringing people together in a space and convening around a meal, from my experience in France and from what I experienced in San Sebastian. A very different way to operating than in New York City. After a while of being involved in the industry in New York City, I started to realize that it was just like fast fashion. The conversations that were happening internally was, how can we hook people? How can we draw them in? It didn't seem to be very sustainable. There was a lot of churn in staff coming and going, front of the house, back of the house. There was no real sense of trying to take care of people. Like, I did my best to try and give people the wages I wanted to, but I was under pressure from the group to try and keep the payroll within a certain bracket. And it was just, to me, it seemed like the economics of it didn't work because it was so expensive. It was so hard to turn a profit. So there was no scope to really think more broadly and to think about the real care of what's going on. It was impossible just to be open 4 days a week or 5 days a week. You had to be open 7 days a week to try and keep generating revenue, but at the same time you're losing money. So I was sort of captivated by it, but after a year in it, I was starting to see that this didn't have the same depth that it had from what I saw in my time in Toulouse and in San Sebastian. It was a rat race, and it was a rat race of scaling and growing and taking investors' money, trying to convince them of the opportunities here. Oftentimes the investors weren't there necessarily because they expected to make a lot of money. It was a sense of pride and showing up into these spaces feeling like I'm an owner of this restaurant. So
yeah, it was for like clout rather than actual like business return.
Yeah, there was a huge amount of distance as well. And the partners who owned it, they were never in it. They were just partners of it. So they would come in and give a view of what the aesthetics of the place should look like. But in terms of what the experience was like of being in the restaurant, they were so far removed from that. So it was, it was a great experience. I loved it. But I saw after, a year and a half or so that this was only going to take me so far.
Wow. So then what did you think of doing next? Like, did you think you could maybe parlay this food interest into a different medium? Like what were you thinking of doing?
Well, I lived in Bushwick, and Roberta's Pizzeria was close to my apartment in Bushwick. For anybody who knows, it's a very famous and really good pizza restaurant. And in it, they had a radio station. And during my time in college, I had a show on the college radio station, and I also worked as a sound engineer in the local radio station. So I loved audio as a medium and radio. And I wanted to see if I could get a show on the radio station. I had no idea what it really was. It was called Heritage Radio Network. It's still around. One evening we were doing like a strategy session for the restaurant. We had some food and some beers at the office, and I was a bit drunk coming home, and I decided I'd go and get a pizza to go in Roberta's. And while I was at the counter, I asked the girl who was taking my order, how can I get on the radio station here? And she said, what radio station? I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, the radio station connected to Roberta's. And she said, I don't even know anything about that. And then there was a guy in the line, and he said, do you want to get on there? And I said, yeah. He said, my friend Jack Inslee actually started it. I'll give you his number.
No way. So
I said, oh, amazing. So I started texting Jack, and then he would say, yeah, come and meet me. And he'd never meet me. I'd arrive and he'd be like, no, I can't, I'm too busy. So then I started showing up guerrilla style. I'd just show up in the office, and he'd say, who's that? And I'd say, it's Patrick. And he'd say, no, I can't, I'm too busy. So then I gave up thinking, okay, I'm not going to get on this radio station. I must have tried 3 or 4 times. 3 months later, I'm in Colombia, in Santa Marta, the north of the country. I was just on holidays. I was just on holidays traveling around Colombia. And we were in this sort of remote beach that you had to get a bus to. And there was a few tents on the beach. I had gotten pretty sunburnt early on in the time on the beach. So I was hanging out in the tent. And I heard these 4 American girls in the tent next to me having a conversation. And it seemed like some of them knew each other, but others were getting to know each other, sharing things about their life. And one girl said, oh, I was working at Heritage Radio Network, but I've just left. I'm going to be working for the city of New York now. Once I heard that, I just popped my head into the tent. I said, hello, I'm sorry to invade, but I overheard one of you saying you work at Heritage Radio Network. And this girl, Eliza, said, yeah, that's me. And I said, I really want to get a radio show there, but this guy Jack won't meet me. And she said, well, there's a happy hour in 2 weeks back in Bushwick. If you want to come, you can be my +1, and I'll introduce you to the executive director, Erin Fairbanks, and we'll see what can happen. So I said, cool. I went, met Erin. She gave me the opportunity to record a pilot episode with this guy, Casey Nelson. He had a hot honey company in Brooklyn, and we got liftoff. So Why Food was born. The whole premise of the show was why there was such a movement of people coming from typical and traditional careers into the food industry, which was becoming more and more common at that time. And Chef's Table had come out, and it was an amazing show, but it was really focused on the chef and the restaurateur. And in the fringe was all the other people involved in the restaurant and in the industry. And I wanted to speak to them. So the sommeliers, the artisanal producers, the food academics, all sorts of people within that world. And that's what Why Food came to be. So I was doing that while I was working in managing the restaurant. I started this podcast, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll just focus on that and turn that into something, because we were starting to get some really good listenership figures.
Yeah.
So I just started bartending for a few nights a week in the
just
city.
Focusing full on Why Food and hosting that.
That was the intent, Sam. That was the intent. But the bar industry is a difficult one to be in and to remain focused on daily activities when you're working until 4 a.m. shifts. And I was young. I don't know, how old was I? Maybe 23, 24 about. So I was working in the Spotted Pig. I was working out at a place in Brooklyn, and you sort of get sucked into it. It becomes a culture. You're drinking at work. And then when you're not working, you're visiting other people's bars and restaurants that have come to yours and you've taken care of them. And it can become this sort of cycle where it's the cycle of consuming. Now, it's not to say that I drank to excess, but it certainly destabilized my capacity to focus on what I had intended to do.
I mean, I feel like a lot of that atmosphere can be extremely social, which is very fun, but can kind of become all-consuming if you have other things that you need to do during the day, which just seems like what you were trying to do. So with all of this, like, I don't know, time suck and from the bartending world, what happened to Why Food?
Well, in hindsight, when I look back on it, I didn't connect and ask people for guidance enough. I tried to sort of just figure it out on my own. And that was an error in hindsight. So there was a lot of cycles of thinking that sort of got nowhere. Maybe I'll do this and maybe I'll do that and maybe I can create this partnership, and aimless thinking, sort of hoping for an aim, but ultimately it being aimless. So because, and I've come to learn this so much in observing myself and others now, if we are separate from the thing that we are pursuing. So for example, I had that show, I was interviewing people every week. There was all of the efforts around the media and preparing for the guest, all these elements which you're very aware of. To really bring it further, you have to actually go even deeper into it. You need to even learn even more. You need to connect with other people in the world. And you need to find ways to make sure that it's starting to align with you in the way that you're conducting yourself and what you're pursuing and how you're developing yourself. I was not doing that. It was quite the opposite. There was this thing that I had a commitment to, which it almost started to become. I had to interview somebody a week. I had to find guests. I had to prepare for them. But I started to kind of do the minimum to get through this because I was being sidetracked by the other thing, which was giving me money and a certain lifestyle. And at some point, I started to feel sort of disenfranchised with both worlds. This podcast didn't seem to take lift off like it was going to become some sort of a thing that I wanted it to become. I also was feeling disillusioned with the hospitality world and world of food because of what I said. It was so different to what I had thought it to be or how I'd experienced it to be in France and Spain. And I also started to have this yearning and this hunger to engage in business because I could see that my ways of thinking around the podcast were so limited. I couldn't even seem to think in a very strategic way about stuff. And I felt like that was because the way that business operated in hospitality, or certainly as I was able to plug into it, was sort of its own entity. And I wasn't able to see the bigger picture of how you sell and persuade and market and things grow. So I decided to hand off the reins of the show. And I took a job as the head of sales for this software in Ireland. It was an events venue software, which they wanted to bring to the US, and they had got some funding to do that. And they
you
hired
were still
me.
in New York at that time, but you
still
had
in New
those
York at that
connections
time.
in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this new job, and it feels like what you are learning right now is like, I kind of might need to spend more time learning about what it means to run a business outside of hospitality if I'm going to do a business outside of hospitality. So how do you get to a point where you realize you need to read better to start learning that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah. Okay, interesting. I see the through line here. Well, my first job it was like a second job that I had when I was working in that property in New York, and I was cleaning the streets and hoovering the floors and whatnot. I also sort of became an assistant, this guy who oversaw all these buildings. And we had a really weird working dynamic in the mornings where we would start work at 7 a.m. and we would be at his desk and we would go through his emails. And we would both read the email together. He'd be sitting beside me, and then he would dictate his response and I would type it. And he was always reading the emails faster than I was, not making a mistake. And sometimes when I would try and get ahead of him, because we would read it and then we would talk about what this was about and how to approach it. And sometimes I would try to get ahead of him and say, I think we should respond with this. And he'd say, but you missed out on that. And I think, how is he doing this? How is he reading it so fast and he's not missing anything? So I said it to him one day. I said, how are you doing this? How are you reading faster than me all the time? And he said, I took a speed reading course. He was an Irish guy. I took a speed reading course 20 years ago when I moved here from Cork. And I thought, speed reading, this is crazy. And I looked it up and it was like $300 or $350 to do a 4-hour workshop in New York. And at that time I thought, oh, that's not worth that.
Was it in person?
It was in person. That's not worth that kind of money. That's cool, but I'm not going to do it. And yeah, it was probably like 4 years later. Could have been 4.5 years later. 4 years later, I had this. It came to my mind again. I would love to do that, and I should invest in myself. I should invest in myself to develop. So I paid for it, and yeah, it just was mind-blowing to me. It was mind-blowing to me that I had never learned sort of pragmatic skills like this, because I'd been reading these self-help books, which were all sort of very conceptual, like, or not conceptual. There was a pragmatism to it, like put your things in order, develop good habits and good routines. The way that people respond to you is not you, it's their projection on you, these sorts of things, learning about yourself. But there was very rarely was I experiencing something where it was a direct application of a skill that I could work on and develop. And yeah, I had this image of myself, this self-identity of being a very bad reader. It was one of the reasons why I probably disengaged in college so much, because I felt like I had no capacity to handle the volume of material that we had to read and process. And my friends seemed to be much better at it than me, naturally. So then I did this 4 hours and I realized, oh my days, this is not a fixed or governing capability, it's a skill. And I haven't learned that skill since I was 3 or 4 years of age. I'm only revisiting it now when I'm 25. So yeah, suddenly I realized, wow, what else is possible here? What else can I develop within myself? And that just led to a big journey of exploration.
So what was the course that you ended up taking? And like was it you did that 4-hour course and then suddenly you could read like 5 times faster, or what was the effect, and how did you take that with you after the course?
Well, the fundamental thing I think that's so interesting about it is, okay, look, it's great. You can read faster and you can read slower and you can learn to read more complex material. At the heart of the matter is that the way that we learn to read as young children is essential at that time. But we have to let go of it and we have to develop a new approach to reading. So there's nothing wrong. It's actually really good the way that we learn to read at 3 or 4 or 5. But there comes a point where the material gets much more complex and the fundamental skill of associating words and building an understanding of syntax and pronouncing the words properly, we do that well. So the ways that we learn to read at 3 or 4 or 5 no longer serve us. We have to learn to let go of those old habits and introduce new habits. And that was the thing that was most interesting to me, more than being able to read faster, more than that, that was cool to play with for a few months. I started practicing the drills that I was given, but it was more recognizing, wow, so what else am I carrying with me, which was a habit from the past, which served me at that time, but doesn't serve me now? And that it was that kind of philosophical viewpoint that was so interesting to me. And I also, in truth, recognized that the materials were incredible. The teaching methodology was fantastic, but the instructor herself was not very good. So I reached out to the CEO and I complimented him on how great the thing is that he's built. But I also let him know that I think if you're going to do workshops in New York, I think I could do a much better job than the person you have who's running them at the moment.
Wow.
And then we met for a coffee and then he hired me and I ran them in New York and in Boston. And then I started traveling around, going to different companies and colleges, teaching these workshops. Iris reading, that's correct, yeah.
So you get this job doing the speed reading coaching, which is kind of funny. Like you do this course to learn how to like kind of create a business later, and then end up getting a job from learning how to do the thing that was supposed to help you get a job or create a business. So what was this other company that you had parallel to this?
So I took that course in like November of 2018. And then by March of 2019, I knew that I was going to be leaving my role in Brightbiz, which was this Irish software company that I'd worked in for nearly 2 years. Basically, they weren't going to take on any more investment. They weren't going to take on any investment. I had sold to enough clients that there was enough monthly recurring revenue coming in that they didn't want to take on any more sales. So I had worked myself out of the job. And we had that conversation in December. And I had to find something else. And I didn't really want to go working for anybody else. I wanted to do something for myself at this time. So I had these 2 years of experience in sales. And then I had also, prior to that, had a year and a half's experience in running the podcast, and previous to that, audio. And I was really becoming interested in NPR style podcasts, This American Life. A lot of the people who created podcasts at that time had come from This American Life. They had worked there. And I saw that the way that audio was being created was so immersive, and it would just draw you in. Whereas I had a chance to listen to the ads on Spotify, the free version, and I thought to myself, whoa, this is just like the ads that I hear on radio in Ireland, which have no context. They sort of just like dish out the facts straight away, you know, buy 2 bottles of Coca-Cola and you'll get the third one free. This discount is on until the 31st of July. Come now, terms and conditions apply, etc., etc. And I thought, wow, there's such an opportunity as we're moving so much more towards audio to create really contextual audio for the listener, and that it sort of like sits nicely in between the soundscapes that they're listening to, the music. So I created the Bowery Common as something that I called an audio marketing agency. People would ask me, what is that? I can tell you I don't know, but it's what I was able to call it because it was a way to market yourself through audio. So it seemed like the most self-descriptive term I could give it. And I got one client, a very small job, and I was struggling to get other clients. People were struggling to really grasp the value of it. So I created a deck for Spotify and called it Spotify for Business. So a friend of mine is a designer, and we redesigned what Spotify would look like if businesses had their own profiles, just like artists do, but slightly differently.
Yeah.
And I got this deck essentially explaining what I saw, where audio was going, the role that Spotify was going to play as being the most important audio platform out there. And it got picked up. I sent it to like 4 random executives, and I got an email from one of their assistants saying Megan wants to hear more. And I got brought in to do like a brainstorming session for the marketing team of Spotify of the history of audio and how to make it more immersive, how to make it more engaging. Because a lot of these people kind of came into audio or came in with marketing backgrounds, but not specifically in audio. So they came from print or digital media, and they were coming with that perspective. And it just worked out by luck that when I sent that deck in, they were having conversations internally that they needed to start marketing themselves through audio, because up to that point they were just marketing themselves to brands and advertisers through video or through decks. So yeah, that was an amazing project working with them, brainstorming with them.
I mean, also crazy that your first like big client was Spotify, like the biggest client that you could have. That is huge.
Yeah, it was very surreal. It's so often going in there, I was thinking, how is this happen? Because they had just acquired Anchor and they had just acquired Gimlet Media deals for
which were huge acquisitions.
Huge acquisitions. And I was thinking, these people in those companies are way more talented than I am. How on earth are they working with me when they have all this in-house talent now? But I came to saw these large corporations operate in silos. So it doesn't really matter because they're siloed, they're separate and distinct from each other. So yeah.
So you were doing this job with Spotify, but it seems like around the same time you were thinking about creating like mentorship and coaching for like founders and business people. How did you get into that?
So that all sort of kind of came together where at the time that I was running the Bowery Common, I was also doing the speed reading work. So I had done that for about 8 months now at this point. And after the Spotify project, I got opportunities to go and pitch into other companies. The Spotify one was just like a chance of luck. Now I had to recreate it. And there was two things. The business model is very tough because I have to front all the costs for all the freelancers that I hire, and then I get paid. So I'm always negative, essentially. I'm always depending on the credit card. And I didn't like that. I didn't think that was a great business model. And it was a difficult one at that time, I couldn't see another way. And equally, I started being brought into room with other creatives. Now, I'd never worked I'd never worked in marketing. I'd never worked in agencies. And all these terms were being bandied about. And I remember being in one meeting for Captain Morgan. They were thinking about how they could use my services for the Captain Morgan winter campaign. And I just thought, this is not creative at all. Like, this is of no interest to me, where we're going to try and find this character, Captain Morgan, who's been existing for decades, and we're going to find a way to make him interesting for people to draw their attention so that they'll purchase a bit more of this Spice Drum over Christmas. And I just thought, no. The Spotify one felt genuinely really creative and interesting. These ones didn't. So I was really confused. I was really confused with that business. I didn't feel connected to it. And I didn't want to keep teaching the same slides and the same workshop again and again that I had done so many times with Iris. And I also saw that the reading was like a cherry on top. What people really needed was to understand themselves. What I saw everywhere was that there was a huge issue with focus. I saw fractured minds everywhere I went. So I had suggested to the CEO, this should be a cognitive skills company, not a speed reading company. And he said, oh, that's interesting. He said, do you want to create like a program for us? And then we'll see how it goes. And I thought, no, I'll just do them myself. So that's when I decided to go out on my own and created Momentum Mind. And I ran one public workshop. It was all centered around focus. And I got to that point by testing out. I gave a lot of courses to friends. The beginning, it was speed reading, and then they told me, oh, that module on learning was so interesting. If you could go deeper on learning, that would help a lot. Then I created a course on learning. Then people told me, wow, that module on focus, that's the thing I really need. I'd love if you could go deeper on that. And then I went deeper on that, and then I saw that seemed to have this broad appeal that people really wanted to apply in their lives. And then shortly after that, COVID happened. So I had made the intention that this was going to be a digital business, and it was going to be a digital learning experience. And it was a little hard in January, February, and March to make that pitch to companies because they wanted me to come in person. But by March, once COVID happened, of course, there was a lot of unpredictability for the first 3 months. But once the dust settled, there was a huge appetite for this. So I managed to get into the financial insurance industry, into annuity companies, and it sort of just spread. They all shared the good news with each other. You gotta work with this guy Patrick and get his Momentum Mind program for your team. And
so what did that look like in terms of sales? Like, how many of these courses were you selling? How many people were using them?
So there was two tiers. There was one where it was going to corporate teams. So I think at that time we were selling it for something like 2,800, and we could have anywhere from 18 to 70 people going through it as a 6-week group. And then we also started working on some enterprise deals with companies that wanted some of these modules for the whole enterprise. So yeah, there were deals that were ranging from anywhere between 35,000 up to 175,000.
Wow.
And
this is for a product that like is fully digital.
Fully digital and really scalable, because you're essentially just kind of not rinsing it, but you've made the product,
made
the IP.
The course. You just kind of are just like giving it to these different companies and
then
making
we would
sure
host
that all
live
their employees
calls.
use them.
So we would host live calls throughout it. So the engagement was the live calls throughout it with each cohort.
Was that the most amount of revenue that you had had from a company up until that point?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, most definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
things were pretty difficult. It felt good because my whole time in New York, I was broke ultimately. The most money I had made was that first year as the GM of the restaurant. Progressively, my income went down every year for the next 4 years because I took more kind of silly and risky moves. I was not, I was chasing potential more than I was chasing money. So yeah, at 26, it felt really good to feel like I could now
afford things
and give things back to my mum. Before that, my gifts for her birthday and Christmas were often very sweet cards. There might not even be a gift at all because I just didn't have the money. So yeah, it felt really good to be able to treat her and bring her on trips and not to feel that huge burden and weight of financial insecurity all the time.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So you were creating this Momentum Mind Academy, which basically was a like online business that was trying to teach all of these different like corporate employees the skills to read better, to focus better, all of these like different like disciplines to basically increase their productivity. And I want to get to HARA, which is what you're up to today. But in between that, you had a move back to Ireland and a yoga retreat that seemed to come at a pretty important time. So, could you tell me a little bit about both of those?
Yeah, well, during COVID, I moved to, I was in New York. I left after 2 months, went back to Ireland, and then moved to Mexico at the very end of 2020. And during that time, met some amazing people. I was living in Oaxaca, got introduced to a guy who was telling me all the great things about silent retreats, silent meditation retreats. And before that, I thought, I'd heard about this stuff and I thought these people are nut jobs that are going and doing that for 10 days of silence. But the way that he was speaking about it with such a glowing sensation of him when he was commenting on the people that he's met and the way that he's felt afterwards, I thought, okay, this could be interesting. And he told me that there was a center on the coast in a town called Mazunte. There was a place where I could go and there was a yoga center there. So I signed up for this 10-day silent retreat, and then I saw that they had also a nearly a month-long yoga course before that, and I didn't have any workshops with companies at that time in April, so I booked it in. So it was an amazing 6 weeks. It was an amazing 6 weeks to work on myself, to see who I was in relation to others, to develop a deeper connection with myself. It certainly revealed a lot of frailties and weaknesses within myself that I sort of knew were there, but I never truly acknowledged. And yeah, I think it started to shift my whole orientation. From up to that point, it was about the consumption of information through these books. And I thought that would take me where I needed to go. And it helped me. It gave me a certain base. But eventually I started to feel like a mechanic who knew everything about how the car functioned, but didn't know how to drive it. And I was not at peace in my own mind. I was very self-righteous, I would say, thinking that I knew the best ways to go about things. I was actually very weak in the sense that I was so strict on routines and systems that I was weak to that being disrupted. If that got disrupted, that suddenly became an excuse of how the whole day was ruined because I wasn't able to follow this repeatable process. So going inside made me realize there's a whole load of things that I need to clean out from here. And equally, there's a huge amount of direct knowledge that I can get about life and myself from doing this. So yeah, it's not to say that I've neglected reading or learning, but I started to recognize that there's a way to learn from ourselves and our capacity to observe ourselves and reflect on our nature. And those 6 weeks definitely gave me a way of accessing that.
So how did you kind of parlay that into what you would eventually create with HARA?
So I came to see that at that time when I created the Momentum Mind, I thought that it was all up here. I thought that this was the thing that you needed to work on, all of these cognitive skills. And yeah, I was looking for things like sharpness and performance and focus. But actually, when I was hearing from people, and my nature was not to emphasize that so much, it was much more to emphasize the development of the human being in who they are. And I felt as if the momentum mind was too narrow it felt unfit for where I was going. It needed to be much more expansive in the human being. So we interviewed a lot of people who had gone through our programs, and they started using words like grounded, anchored, stable, secure. Peaceful. And I realized, okay, there's something that's happening in this sort of this grounding quality that's happening with people, because what was happening is we were talking about life. We were talking about how to bring some consistency into our lives and how to choose the direction of our lives. And for a lot of these people in an environment that moves so quickly, there's no space for self-reflection. So it's just about moving on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And it feels like you're just moving with the direction of where the business is going, but you have no say in the matter. And what they felt from being in the momentum mind was that it gave them pause. It gave them an opportunity to actually take stock and choose how they were going to live, choose what patterns were not serving them and what needed to change. So it actually came through a meditation that a friend had guided me through, which was focused on the HARA, which is this point, you can't see it here, but this point in the gut, essentially, where we have these 3 points of consciousness, the head, the heart, and the HARA being the gut. That's a term more from the Japanese view of things. The Dantian is a view from Chinese martial arts. And yeah, we had hired all of these branding people to help us rebrand, and they were coming up with names that didn't feel right. And then I did this meditation in a woods in Ireland, in Clarenbridge. And I was walking out and I was thinking, God, that was so incredible. I really feel so good and so grounded. And then I was thinking, I wish more people could get access to something like this. And then I was like, wow, that's it. That's what we're getting at. That's the direction that this is going in. And it should be called HARA, because we're trying to ground people back into themselves, as opposed to always going out.
So where is HARA today?
HARA has been almost like an R&D project, I would say, for the last 12 plus months. It began with recognizing that linear teaching was not doing the business. It was making money, but it wasn't making the change that I had hoped it would make in people. And the reason being is because many of the issues that I was seeing in people that we were working with, actually, I discovered had nothing to do with the amount of knowledge or information that they had. It had much more to do with their internal state and their capacity to be with themselves and to regulate themselves and their self-awareness. So I stopped teaching those types of workshops, 6-week programs, content calls. Makes great money. It's a very scalable business to a degree. It's scalable to a degree. But I needed to feel like it was for something. So for the last 6 months, we've had a community of entrepreneurs and business leaders where there's this directionality of moving towards. A lot of the people who are in there have made money, so they've reached they've passed that threshold of survival from a financial perspective. Yet a lot of them still live within that state, and what we're helping them do is to create much more alignment between their lives and their businesses. So it doesn't feel like one is suffering in place of the other, but rather both are developing. Because what I often see is either the person has put so much effort on the business that the business is very developed, but the person is very underdeveloped, the founder, the owner, or the individual puts so much effort and energy into developing themselves that they feel so far ahead of the business that they had built, which now hasn't caught up with the pace of their own development. And either way, it creates a lot of tension, and it feels hard to pull from a fuel source that can keep you going day in, day out, and can feel like everything is flowering and budding together, which is most certainly possible. A lot of people feel like it isn't. So that's for individuals. That's what's existing in HARA at the moment. And very soon we're going to be launching some in-person workshops, which I'm really looking forward to, because I've been giving keynote talks the whole way through this and going to conferences and being with companies. And the whole time I've just been observing what's the next direction that HARA is going to go in, what's needed in the marketplace and based on the skills that we offer. And I see now where the issues at hand are. As there are so many distributed teams, one of the reasons for so much of this burnout and this sense of a lack of productivity, a lack of efficiency, a lack of performance, and also a lack of meaning and fulfillment for those who work in their jobs is when you're in a distributed team, it's very hard to know the people deeply that you work with, especially if you only meet up 2 or 3 times a year. And in those meetings, it's as a large group. It's very hard to really get to know the people deeply. So consequently, when those individuals, say, for example, if I'm in New Mexico here and I have a boss who's in New York and I only see him or her 3 times a year, I want to show that I'm worth my role. I want to show that I'm worth being here. And I need this because I have a family to support. So the way that I'm going to prove my worthiness is through being hyper-responsive, is through being on, is by responding to every email as quick as I can, because that's a way for me to show you in a very low context environment that I am worthy, that I am doing my job. And you can give people as many frameworks and as many protocols to operate and manage their day for better performance and better fulfillment. But if they feel that emotionally insecure and socially insecure, that they don't feel like they're known and understood by those that they work for and those that work around them, it doesn't matter, because it's coming from a much more emotional and primal state. So I'm recognizing that what people need is they need ways to connect, ways to be together, and ways that create deep bonding and connection between these teams. So that's what we're going to be starting with in the next couple of months within HARA, working with companies to bring this to their teams. And once that foundational layer of bonding and trust and connection has been established, then we can actually start developing the skills for improved focus, for improved performance, improved communication. But we need that existing foundation to begin with. So that's what's happening in HARA at the moment and what's happening over the next few months.
Well, it feels like a really important foundation to build. And I mean, those foundations are so important because like as this scales and grows, if you have an unstable or maybe a foundation that doesn't align with your values and doesn't feel like true to your values, then you're kind of going to be back where you started before. And so I see the intentionality that you're putting into making sure that this starts right. So you can build it for a long time in a way that feels authentic to you. So looking back at this journey, you know, from starting in corporate law to going into food, to radio, to self-improvement, to community now. Looking back at like the beginning of that story, you know, the kid that was unsure of what to study and took the advice of a godfather, and you know, and maybe like young kids that are in similar positions to that. What advice would you give those people and yourself?
Be more willing to accept your uniqueness. There was a friend who was having her 21st birthday party. So I'd been living in France in Toulouse the first semester. I was coming home for Christmas. Now, when my friend and I moved to France for college, what we discovered very early on is we couldn't dress the way that we dressed in Ireland. In Ireland, we wore tracksuits, baggy clothes, and people on the bus when we went into college looked at us like we were lunatics. So they were all so well dressed. They even had scarves and stuff. We'd never even seen this. And we realized we need to up our game. So I don't know, do we go to Zara or H&M or something like that? But I saw these brown boots. Brown boots, they had like a zip on the inside, just like up to the ankle or a little bit above. And I thought, oh, these are looking pretty spicy. I'm gonna get these for myself. And nobody was gonna be able to comment on it because I was in France. I wasn't in Ireland. I definitely wouldn't have done that if I was in Ireland, but in France, I could get away with it. So I come home at Christmas and I'm meeting up with all my friends for the first time at this 21st. But that evening, like 3 hours later, I'm at the bar and Now, once again, remembering we're like these 8 outliers. All the other people are from the area. They know each other to some degree. And I'm chatting with this older guy, and he's asking me how I know the girl whose birthday it is. I told her I go to college with her. How do you know her? I'm friends with her dad. Very good. We're talking about the night, such and such. The conversation kind of dies down. And then he looks down and he looks at me with these big eyes and he says, "You're the man with the boots. I've been hearing about you all night. Everybody's been talking about you." So that will go to show in Ireland just one little deviation from the norm. Like at that time, wearing a pair of brown boots was so different to just showing up in your sneakers that people around were, unbeknownst to me, saying, "Look at that guy with a pair of boots." So consequently, there's this sort of edging to show my uniqueness, but never going too far with it, because if you do, it feels like it's just too overwhelming to deal with all of that pushback. And yeah, that lived in me a lot, I think, until for quite a while. And eventually I just started to learn how to let other people's perception go, because how they saw me and judged me was through their own lens. So if I could give some advice, it would be to, in whatever way I could convey it, to try and understand that a little bit sooner.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at Finding Founders Podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Finding Founders is produced and hosted by me, Samuel Donner.
Our Chief of Staff and Operations is Jessica Lynn.
Our audio editing team lead is Adrian Tapia, with support from
Irene Van Berkel,
Matt Fernandez,
Renee Buchanan,
Sophia Donner,
David Saide,
Ashley Jimenez,
Nicholas Guzman,
Aaron Devereaux,
Sanessa Gisley,
and Lois Choi.
Our outreach and research lead is Kenny Ong, with support from
Sarah Hobson,
Charisse Tan,
Harushi Kanauchi,
Kristen Hagelin,
Aya Cortez,
and Valencia Lu.
Our writing team lead is Elizabeth Bowen, with support from
Aiden Ashworth,
Nikki Mukawa,
Sylvie Wang,
and Eric Mena.
Our design team lead is Shruti Ramanand, with support from
Tiffany Dang,
Yao Liu,
and Dina Gabriel.
To see more of what we're up to, subscribe to our newsletter at findingfounders.co. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.
So you're literally just like looking at words. You're just trying to see how fast you can look at words. How do you know, like, are you trying to look at every single word? Are you just trying to look at full lines? Like how do you know you're actually like could get to the point of comprehension, you know, like if you're like, if you know what that means.
So if you think about it this way, like I drove from Santa Fe to Albuquerque yesterday. I was driving on the highway. I was driving 75. It didn't feel like I was going that fast. And then as I made my way into the city, I was driving like 55 and it felt like I was going super fast because I was amongst all these cars.
Mm-hmm.
What's helpful is, it's another analogy, but like if you're going to squat a heavy weight and then you just go and do a normal squat with your body, it feels so light. It feels like it's easy all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're training your eyes to move at a faster rhythm with no level of comprehension, it will just increase your baseline because you have expanded your comfort zone.
I see.
The same is true if you read really slowly. It's helpful too. Either way, because we all seem to find our way into this natural rhythm, this homeostasis, this point of balance. But it's helpful if we can deviate ourselves from it because then we feel comfortable bouncing around. So if you do that and you let go of the self-vocalization, the sub-vocalization, I mean to say, that helps. It helps you to actually start to read faster. And then the other part of that is in training the comprehension to try and just skim the material very briefly before you actually read it. So to try and get a sense of what the direction of this book is, where it's going, particularly if it's nonfiction. So now you have a sense of a frame of what the journey, the narrative arc of this book is, what the arguments are. And now you can be more attuned to pick out the specific details which are relevant to you. Whereas what a lot of us will do is we'll just start the book at the beginning and we're actually building the narrative arc as we go through it. And we're also and as a consequence, we're more focused on the narrative arc and missing out on all the details that are necessary and relevant. So those are some sort of key points I think that help a lot in the journey.